Today I'm here with a man who is a former federal prosecutor and, if the polls are any indicator, will be the next district attorney of Los Angeles County. Nathan Hockman, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
So we can take a little trip down memory lane to see how we got to the point at which criminal justice and public safety in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County have become so problematic or on everybody's mind. We take a little time back to 2013. LA had been coming off 13 straight years of a decrease in crime, was actually the safest by pure crime rate, the safest city of more than 2 million residents in America. What's happened since? How did we have such a decrease in public safety, and how did crime begin to run rampant, seemingly starting in about 2014?
You know, it's actually a good year to pick, because 2015 was actually considered our safest year in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. So that year you had, this always happens when people feel safe, is they take it for granted. And so in that year, George Gascon authored Proposition 47.
And George Gascon, for those who are listening out there, may not be familiar, that is the current district attorney in Los Angeles.
Right, and he was the district attorney at the time of San Francisco. And what he did is he said, we're going to turn felonies into misdemeanors for both theft and drug use. So felonies used to be any amount that you stole over $400 basically. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, we're going to raise that limit to $950. So now if you steal just under $950, it's a misdemeanor. Then he's going to do the same thing with drug use. Let's focus on meth, heroin, fentanyl. He said that those crimes used to be felonies. If you possess them, turn them into misdemeanors. But that was only part one of his plan. Part two is then to become the district attorney and not actually prosecute the misdemeanors. Mm-hmm. So effectively, when you come in, you say, we're not prosecuting thefts, especially against juveniles, under $950. We're not going to do the drug possession prosecutions of people dealing with fentanyl, meth, and heroin. So you've effectively decriminalized both areas of prosecution. I mean, and no one really saw that coming, because if you put that on the ballot in 2014, that using meth, heroin, and fentanyl would no longer be legal, no way people would vote for that. Same thing with theft. If you said you can steal just under $950 and it's not a crime at all, nobody's going to vote for that. So what happened then, because he came into LA in 2020, is it takes a few years for criminals to actually realize what's going on. Mm-hmm. But they started paying attention. They couldn't believe it. And you get this huge rash of both theft and drug use that's basically plaguing Los Angeles County. Recently you had over 50 12 to 15-year-olds ride their bikes because they couldn't drive to a 7-Eleven, drop the bikes, run inside, ransack the place, grab the stuff, stuff it in their pants, get on their bikes and go. Mm-hmm. When you look at this, and God, I mean, these people are so stupid, they're posting it on social media.
And also so brazen to believe they can get away with it.
Well, that's just it. They were proud. They wanted their friends to see them stealing because they didn't think anything was going to happen to them. And for the most part, the DA's policies, they're right.
Yeah.
And when law enforcement officers or anybody walks by a homeless encampment and literally sees people bent over because they're shooting meth, heroin, fentanyl, the law enforcement officers in many cases just keep walking. Mm-hmm. Because they know if they arrest one of these people and they bring the case in, the DA has a standing policy not to let his prosecutors charge misdemeanor drug use.
Yeah. So it's easy to find some numbers that where crime has gone down if the police simply aren't going to arrest anybody, and many of those lower level crimes. And people, when people analyze crime statistics, they kind of assume that there's no way to hide crime necessarily, because most crimes are going to get booked because they're serious and they're victims. However, typically throughout history, it seems like the numbers get inflated a little bit by a lot of these lower level crimes, and there's so many of these seemingly quality of life infractions. If you stop prosecuting those, magically the crime rate seems to go down because, listen, you're not booking those towards the data.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's a combination to show you how bad things are. You have those crimes not even being reported now, because people, whether it's a 7-Eleven store owner, knows that if some kid comes in and takes $100, the police aren't going to do anything, so they don't report it. When I asked them, well, why don't you at least report it to make an insurance claim? They said, look, our deductible will eat up the loss and we'll lose the policy. So they don't file the claim.
And it's really interesting to crystallize the extent of the issue. A an association of 7-Eleven and shop owners recently, they endorsed you. This is something, they usually don't get involved in this, but it's become so problematic that they've gone to bat. They've put a significant amount of money towards endorsing your candidacy because, listen, they can't live like this anymore. And that just really crystallizes how people who used to be able to took it for granted that they'd be able to operate their business without the threat of crime now can no longer do so.
You know, I met with 100 7-Eleven franchisee owners, and I didn't know that every 7-Eleven you see is actually owned by an individual. Often they've had to put their life savings to buy that franchise. And for years, these were very profitable businesses. But then George Gascon showed up. Then this wave of crime has showed up. One of the guys showed me on his WhatsApp the video from his store where a guy was taking 2 6-packs of beer. And the store owner said, okay, you owe me $20. And the guy looks at him, flips him a $5 bill. And the store owner says, well, no, you owe me $15 more. And the guy says, you should feel lucky that I'm giving you $5 at all.
Yeah.
And that is a mindset that is a very dangerous mindset, particularly to teach to young people. Because when they're in their teens, if they believe that the laws are suggestions, that was a concept that a mom in South LA gave me, who's raising a teenage boy, trying to teach him the difference between right and wrong. Stealing has consequences. And he shows her video from his social media where his friends are stealing and nothing's happening.
Yeah.
So she said, look, the DA's office does not have my back. She basically said these laws seem to be suggestions, and well, if they are, you can follow them, not follow them, but there's no consequence if you don't follow a suggestion. You know, these are the situations we see, for instance, with the protesters. You know, with the protesters, I'm a huge believer that if you want to say things that I find vile and reprehensible, you know, go on the sidewalk, respect the time, place, and manner restrictions, scream to your heart's content, and I'll protect that right. But if words turn into illegal conduct, if people then want to go shut down a freeway, shut down an airport, you know, vandalize a college campus, if they want to attack, in this case, Jewish people trying to enter a synagogue on People Robertson, that's when words have absolutely become illegal conduct, and that illegal conduct has to be held accountable. Because if you don't hold it accountable, if you don't arrest these people, if you don't prosecute these people, you just embolden them to commit more crimes.
Yeah.
So after that whole series of illegal conduct, where George Gascon stood silently on the background. I mean, Mayor Bass called those attacks on Jews in front of his synagogue abhorrent. Gavin Newsom came in and said it was completely unacceptable. George Gascon, we're still waiting for him to say anything about that. And not shockingly, a few weeks later, those folks shut down the 405 freeway during rush hour.
And to sit there and for them to believe that they can get away with this.
Correct.
And this is, and I want to go back to the underlying logic behind all of this, because as we've seen, as you mentioned, everything that you're mentioning seems completely common sense and something that currently, in the current modern year, everybody seems to be gravitating towards. But clearly, because George Gascon got elected, because his 2014 ballot initiative, Prop 47, which was named the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Act, got passed, which is what decriminalized a lot of this activity, they were propagating a certain logic that seemed to make sense to people that these so-called lower-level crimes, quality of life crimes, drug possession and usage, petty crime, things of that nature, public disorder, that these weren't things that should result in jail time. Their logic was, wait a second, we have two. They would use this term, mass incarceration, and that's not a term that has been persuasive to people, that when they hear mass incarceration, oh, well, we don't want that. We don't want to be a society that's so punitive and just has all these people in jail. But the amount of people in jail needs to reflect the amount of people that commit crimes. So their logic, essentially, and a logic that unfortunately took hold and did land with a lot of people from, let's call it 2014 to maybe 2021, 2022, was that these lower level crimes were generally victimless, that that prosecuting people and incarcerating them, putting them in jail for these crimes was not helping anyone, that it was punitive, that it was unfair, that it was targeting certain groups, and that we needed to reimagine criminal justice in not prosecuting and punishing these crimes. That seemed to be, and what have you seen in terms of people it being exposed that logic is faulty, and that unfortunately, for better or for worse, we need to prioritize the interests of law-abiding people, and some of these so-called lower-level crimes do need to be prosecuted.
You're absolutely right on the logic. In fact, I would just add to it. They start their narrative not in 2014. They started in the 1850s when they believed that the police were originally formed to retrieve fugitive slaves. They then take a 19th century systemic racism view that the police, prosecutors, and prisoners are all designed for systemic racism to oppress black and...
Despite the fact that every other society, even the ones that didn't have slaves, also have law enforcement and police.
Correct. But they carry that into the 20th century. They carry it into the 21st century, thereby making criminals, all criminals, not just low-level criminals, the victims of the system, requiring some level of leniency and not focusing at all on the victims that are being created by the actual criminals. So now you get fast forward, we're in 2024, and they've executed their game plan. They have released violent and serious offenders before they've served their full sentences, and they have not prosecuted them to the full extent of the law. In fact, George Gascon boasts that he has saved violent and serious offenders over 10,000 years of prison time by not bringing charges that the law allows based on evidence that was sufficient to prove the charge. That is that mindset. But here's to push back against that mindset. We have the statistics that show that our safety has gone in the wrong direction, because the additional promise that they made is if we do all this sort of restructuring and blowing up the system and putting it back, you're going to be safer than before. And it made no sense. The common sense logic says if you move the lines in behalf of criminals, they're going to commit more crime rather than less crime.
Yeah.
If you tell juveniles we're not going to prosecute you, they're not going to wake up one day and be, sit up in their beds and be more Puritan and say, can you please pass me the next Harry Potter? They're going to go ahead and get on their bikes and bike to a 7-Eleven and just start taking stuff. And the same thing, and those are the low levels. He actually got rid of certain crimes and certain enhancements that are much more serious.
Maybe you can explain for those who aren't familiar the notion of the enhancements and the logic behind those.
Certainly. Let's take probably the most egregious one, which is the gang enhancement. So over 30 years ago, the state legislature is looking for a way to really cripple criminal street gangs who are literally terrorizing their communities.
And also 30 years ago, when the crime rate, particularly the violent crime rate, was many multiples of what it was right now. People still do not remember how much crime there was in the 80s into the early 90s. This is when gang crime was running rampant, and even at LA's worst in this decade, the murder rate was roughly 2.5 to 3x what it is now.
Right. And the state legislature stepped in, created an enhancement that says if you are part of a gang, and the gang motivated you to commit a violent act, we are going to add years to your sentence, called an enhancement. And the idea behind it was that we're going to try and cripple criminal street gangs. And by crippling them, if they can get people not to join gangs because of this additional penalty, if they can get people in the gangs to sort of not commit that crime as part of a gang-motivated transaction, you'll reduce crime in the most vulnerable areas where the gangs are targeted, and you'll reduce the power of the organization. Figuring that a lot of individuals operating individually are not as strong as if they act in a collective group.
Yeah.
And it was working. Gangs were on the run before George Gascon showed up. Then he all of a sudden says, we're not prosecuting. I tell all these 800 prosecutors, even though I myself have never personally prosecuted or defended a single case.
Let's make that so for people who don't know out there. George Gascon, before he became a politician running for the role of top prosecutor in both San Francisco and LA, had never been a prosecutor before. He never prosecuted a case.
Which is almost
mind-blowing.
Shocking.
Yeah.
The top prosecutors never prosecuted. So he's telling these folks that he is no longer going to allow them to bring this enhancement in any case. We're talking gang-on-gang killing. You can't bring the enhancement. So the gangs have gotten stronger. They're smart. They watch what's going on. They recruit 16 and 17-year-olds, give them the gun, Because if they go ahead and have to kill people, one or more, these folks could, another Gascon policy will only be tried as juveniles, which means they'll be out of prison or juvenile hall by their 25th birthday. And if you did the same crime, but you were 18 or older, you'd be out in your 40s, 50s, or 60s.
And listen, there's a reason that we have the distinction between juvenile and adult, but that is supposed to be in a suggestion, right? That if someone is 17 years old and 11 months and they happen to commit a very ill-motivated violent crime, that, hey, in that case, you might try him as an adult. You take the specific circumstances into consideration. George Gascon will not take the specific circumstances. If you are turning 18 tomorrow and you go murder 3 people in cold blood, you're getting tried as a juvenile no matter what. And another one, just the faulty and decayed logic that he keeps on coming up with for everything is essentially says, well, I read some study somewhere that said upstairs medical college of God knows what, that says that the human brain does not fully mature until 25. Thus, these younger people shouldn't be prosecuted as harshly for their crimes. I'm sorry, it doesn't help the victims that the criminal was 17 years old. That doesn't, a 17-year-old kills your grandmother, your family member. That doesn't really help you. That prioritizes the victims not at all and only tries to be less harsh with the criminals.
Exhibit 1 is a case that was reported recently on October 3rd, front page of the LA Times. It said, teen killer case haunts Gascon. It was about a woman named Shanice Dyer. She was 17 years old, part of the East Coast Crips. Someone from the Florencia 13 gang had hit someone in her territory, so she went out one day with a gun looking to kill people. Everything I'm saying to you is stone cold fact. Sadly for these 2 guys, she drives by a house where a guy named Alfonso Carrera is celebrating a baby shower. He's in front of his house meeting his friend Jose Flores. Jose Flores is on his way to be an astrophysicist at NASA. But what they didn't see coming is Shanice Dyer is looking for blood, any blood. So she shoots these 2 guys dead in cold blood. She's 17 at the time, gets in front of the system, and the DA at the time was Jackie Lacey. Jackie Lacey says, again, this woman, and she gets her examined and all, stone cold killer. If you don't basically put her away, she's going to kill again. And so she is recommended to be tried as an adult. Just at that moment, George Gascon wins the election. And within 3 days of taking office, he reverses that transfer to adult court, keeps her in juvenile court. But it doesn't keep her this time to the age of 25 when your brain's developing. She gets out in 4 years by the age of about 23.
For double murder in cold blood.
For double murder.
Unbelievable.
Cold blood, and she killed 2 completely innocent people, absolutely destroyed their lives and their families' lives. I mean, Alfonso Carrera will never even get to meet his baby. This was a baby shower. And sure enough, within a year, she goes ahead and is now going to be tried for killing another person, Joshua Streeter. So if you're Joshua Streeter's family, and you're thinking to yourself, what the hell happened here? How did this woman, who literally 4 years before brutally murdered 2 people, got out so that she could brutally murder one of my family members? That blood is on George Gascon's hands because the direct causal links between one set of murders and the second set of murders is absolutely because of a policy he put in place.
And just to indulge the social experiment based on junk science of a person who believes the world should be ordered and organized in a way that completely makes no sense, that runs contrary to our understandings of humanity built up over decades. And some way, somehow, he slipped it through in 2020 under the fog of whatever was going on that year.
Right, and where I've seen it also impact, and these statistics are so important, is that George Gascon supposedly cares about how the criminal justice system impacts people of color who are committing crimes. But what he doesn't ask the question is, how does the criminal justice system impact people of color who are victims? So let me give you 3 statistics. 1, 87% of victims of homicides in LA are Black and Hispanic. Second, 71% of violent crimes generally are Black and Hispanic. And this one, 4% of the population are Black women of LA County, yet they represent 28% of the victims of violent crimes. Where is he ever focusing on the disproportionate impact that the criminals in the system are having on people of color. Because if he was asking himself those questions, he'd now have to find the solutions as to why they're being attacked in such disproportionate numbers, figure out who's doing the attack, and orient a prosecution and law enforcement effort directed to reduce those attacks. But we never hear that narrative.
I guess that doesn't get you as many plaques and speaking engagements from activist groups, because his only concern seems to be how punitive the criminal justice system is on criminals, not whether or not it's protecting innocent people. And as you mentioned right there, he professes to be a champion of people of color necessarily. Well, a lot of them are waking up, as we've seen in the polls, particularly in the Hispanic community in Los Angeles, are coming out heavily in favor of yourself. And I think people are realizing that, like, wait a second, this person does not prioritize. Looking at what enters his consciousness about who he's trying to protect, and it's not innocent people. It's just trying to be less punitive on criminals. And just another aspect of this that is something that a lot of people might hear and not believe it's so much of an outlier in how the system should work that they can't imagine that it's actually happening. A lot of local law enforcement, or a lot of cases, are being diverted past George Gascon and the law enforcement agency, the district attorney's office that usually prosecutes certain local crimes, being redirected to federal prosecutors because they don't trust him to prosecute the crime.
Right.
That's insane.
You had that famously with an off-duty LAPD officer, Royal. He got gunned down when he was house hunting by 4 gang members. And the sheriff at the time and the police chief, because again, it's an LAPD officer being gunned down in sort of the sheriff's territory. That would absolutely be brought to the DA's office. But this DA refused to say whether or not he would bring the special circumstances that apply when you gun down a police officer. Had he not brought those special circumstances, those killers, those stone-cold assassins of a police officer could be out in as few as 10 to 15 years. But George Gascon, by not doing that, basically sent the sheriff and the police chief to the federal government. And they had no problem protecting effectively their own, the people who are doing the work to bring cases even to the federal government. So those assassins got somewhere between 20, 30, and 50 years in federal prison, which means that they will serve probably 80 to 85% of that time, as opposed to state prison where it's a lot less.
And that's just one example. It's happening quite often, but that's something that's just unforeseen in other local law enforcement, so not trusting the local district attorney that they don't even want them prosecuting the cases which they are willing to prosecute, that they're bypassing them up to the federal prosecutors, which is just wild. So in terms of, we've gone over where this man has failed the people of Los Angeles, where he has blood on his hands for his little social experiment in trying to be less punitive on criminals and disregarding the priorities and the safety of law-abiding citizens. And now in terms of how we fix it, obviously with your election and getting a common sense, a person exhibiting common sense back in the office of district attorney, but also more specifically, one ballot initiative called Prop 36, which not entirely, but mostly, I believe, overturns Prop 47. Also seems that we have a little bit of a different atmosphere in 2024 in California than we had in 2020, and that this ballot measure also appears to be heavily up in the polls. But why don't you tell us a little bit about Prop 36?
Sure. So Proposition 36 is not going to repeal Proposition 47, but it's going to do something that will be very useful if I become district attorney and give me more tools. It's going to go after repeat offenders. It's going to say that if someone get convicted once, if you get convicted twice, on the third conviction, for theft, for instance, a judge can put you in state prison with a felony. Doesn't have to. It's a felony eligible possibility at that point. Again, targeting the repeat offenders, they estimate that 20% of these people are committing 60% of the crime.
Yeah, heavily concentrated amongst a small group of criminals.
Exactly. And they do the same thing with drug possession. If you're convicted not once, but twice, but 3 times, the third time can be treatment eligible. So finally, if someone has a drug addiction, you can get them in the system, get them the treatment that they need, and hopefully get them to the other end of a rehab program so they can get on with a productive life. It also goes after the fentanyl poisoners. And I use that word on purpose because it's not about getting high. They're not peddling a drug. They're literally peddling something that's 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. 2 milligrams will kill you in 2 minutes. And it literally is the #1 killer of 18 to 35-year-olds in our community. 6 homeless people every single day will die of a fentanyl overdose. And we're watching exponential growth if nothing else happens. So 36 I support because it'll give these additional tools in a prosecutor's bag in order to keep people safe in these various areas. And again, what I will use is a 34 years, quite candidly, of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor and a defense attorney to use these tools. Because even if you give these tools to George Gascon, if he considers this stuff a misdemeanor, he doesn't prosecute the first 2 convictions. You never get to the third of either theft or misdemeanor. So Proposition 36 effectively doesn't exist in Los Angeles County if George Gascon's your DA.
Yeah, if you have someone who's is not interested in prosecuting it in the first place, these tools are of far less value. And some of the other faulty logic that they used to get through some of this stuff originally in terms of the homeless problem and the drug problem and fentanyl was, oh, we don't want to criminalize homelessness, or oh, we don't want to criminalize drug use and whatnot. And once again, we need to look, people have short memories, they don't have a view of history. We need to look at the trajectory, and that we once had major drug, homelessness, and crime problems that were reduced substantially, 70% reduction in violent crime, and a massive drop in the local homeless population from about 1994 to 2014. One of the solutions there, and you say, oh, you can't arrest your way out of the problem. No, yes, you can arrest your way out of the problem, is because when I had our mutual friend John McKinney from the DA's office on my podcast a couple years ago, he says, yes, a lot of these people we arrested in the 90s who were on drugs, they got mandatory drug counseling, they got help while they were arrested, while they were in prison, simply letting them run wild and not imposing on any of their narcotics activity and their abusive activity while they're out on the street. That doesn't help anybody. A lot of these people get help and get off drugs once they get arrested and incarcerated. And that is, while that may not make people feel so warm and fuzzy that that's how it has to go sometimes, that is what yields the preferable results in the long run.
And I actually participated with a client who went through the drug court program. And his situation was very typical of what they were saying. He was a guy who lost his job. His family had cut him off because he had lied to his family for too long to get money for his drug habit. He was living out of his car, and he had to steal in order to support his drug habit because the drug dealers don't take credit.
Sure.
And so he finally got caught, and he was looking to go to state prison as a felon or to do an 18-month rehab program that's rigorous, urine tested, AA meetings, 1 day at a time. He didn't think he could make it. He had never made it before. But the hammer of state prison, where he did not want to go and had never been, was enough to get him 1 day at a time, to the point where he gets to the 18 months. He's in court, not to receive a sentence, but to get a certificate that he has completed this program. His parents were there. They hadn't seen their son in 18 months. They'd given up. They got their son back. His siblings were there. They got their brother back. It was about as emotional a day as you could have. And he had a job, a certificate, and the judge said, your record is now wiped clean. Good luck. And that guy has been clean and sober ever since. But it took the criminal justice system to make him reach his rock bottom moment. And for many, many drug addicts, you're not just going to quit on your own. You have to hit a rock bottom moment, hopefully before you're arrested or you died. But sometimes the arrest is what helps get you there. But under Gascon, he's gutted the program because he's taken away that hammer of going to state prison as the alternative to going through this program.
And he's manipulated people's best instincts that they might have considered for a moment, wait a second, the war on drugs has incarcerated some people unfairly who were not engaged in violent activity, might have been for marijuana, but that's also been overestimated is once again that they want, in trying to vilify the approach towards criminal justice that reduced the crime rate by 70% in the 90s and the 2000s, they want to tarnish that with this notion of mass incarceration. But if you go back and look how many people actually got thrown in jail for long prison sentences for usage of marijuana or cocaine without, intent to sell, where it wasn't possession of large amounts as if they're a dealer. I mean, it's basically nobody. It's nearly nobody. And you're not looking to do that. You're not looking to throw people in jail who might be caught with a dime bag. That's not what you're looking to do. These are people who have serious problems, who are otherwise violating laws and are a danger to themselves and others and need that help. And having them in a controlled circumstance in which they can get that help, yes, and to a certain extent need to get that help because they're disincentivized from wanting to be in jail, that is going to reduce the overall social costs. And this whole George Gascon fanciful notion that, wait a second, we spent less money on putting these people in prison. Well, okay, we spent 3 times as much on having to deal with the social costs of them being out of prison. That's what you're aiming for, is that, the reduction of the costs overall for society in whole.
And here's how you get there. It requires you to reject extreme policies.
Sure.
Extreme blanket policies. Right now we have George Gascon's decarceration policies. That's his word, where you basically say, we don't care about the facts and the law. We're going to predetermine that there are certain crimes and certain criminals that we will not prosecute based on his political philosophy, and they will get off. Mm-hmm. Then the other end of the extreme that didn't resolve itself on facts and law was mass incarceration. We don't care about the facts and law. We just want to put as many, usually black and brown people, in jail for as long as possible. I reject both extremes. Where I come down is the middle, and I call it the hard middle because you got to do the hard work. Mm-hmm. It's the hard work of going ahead and looking at each case individually. Look at the individual defendant, the crime committed, the impact on the victim, to determine who the true threats are to our public safety, often those repeat offenders who have to be behind bars. But quite honestly, the ones that aren't. A first-time nonviolent offender, well, that person still has to pay their debt back to society if they violate society's laws. But the punishment needs to be proportional to the crime. So that's a situation where maybe community service, pick up trash on the side of the road, restitution, if you steal something, pay it back, mm-hmm. or a diversion program that gives you that opportunity, that choice that you get between prison or an 18-month rehab program, which if you complete, we will give you that certificate and wipe your record clean. The hard middle approach is proportional, it's balanced, it's effective, mm-hmm. because it doesn't tell those 50 little 12 to 15-year-olds that you can do stuff and violate the laws scot-free. But we're not going to throw these guys in state prison for stealing $100 from a 7-Eleven. Mm-hmm. They're going to go through the system. And very interestingly, with that particular case, what I learned later is that 14 parents walked their kids into sheriff's departments. Yeah. I was shocked to hear it, mm-hmm. knowing, by the way, that the DA's office will not prosecute. But it so defied what the parents were trying to teach their kids about mm-hmm. right and wrong. That, can you imagine being that kid?
Yeah.
You are basically perp walked by your dad and your mom into a sheriff's department, put down on a chair and say, tell the guy what you did. and they probably figured out, okay, well, we'll find some proportional punishment. Maybe you'll have to work every Saturday for the rest of your life, or at least the next couple of years to pay it back.
Hey, it's your first time. Once again, nonviolent first-time offenders, entirely in favor of treating them differently than people that are repeat offenders or violent offenders. Right. But you're just seeing that it's an expression of society's values, that not even these parents. George Gascon professed to speak for every parent in a lower income community that simply believed that crime isn't that much of a big deal. It's like, no, these people want their kids growing up to be responsible citizens who don't engage in any crime, and it's not just that they don't want them over-punished for some of the crimes that they may commit. And I think it's definitely yet another data point and a bit of a sea change in the attitude and the atmosphere that people have had enough of this social experiment. The last issue that I wanted to discuss with you is one that does, I think, go a little bit beyond even what Gascon's failures can fully be tied to, because it seems to be a functional issue. The home invasions in upscale communities have really gotten out of hand. I mean, beyond anything that I can even remember seeing in LA, anytime over the past 25, 30 years. And this seems, while there's definitely an aspect of this that the criminals are choosing LA to do this because LA isn't the only city with big, fancy, expensive houses that might have a lot of valuables in them, right? Criminals are choosing Los Angeles, yes, because they know that there's a more lax system in place for their punishment. But man, there's some brazen home invasions and home robberies and burglaries these days, and it does seem to be a somewhat of a functional concern that the cops don't have the resources to go and intercede and go stop these crimes as they're happening. Because I mean, these are the types of things that that might not be simply a matter of the disincentive of the punishment. I mean, you shouldn't be able to go and 4 people into somebody's house with an alarm system in the middle of the day and get away with it before any law enforcement officers gets there. I mean, how do we attack this home invasion and almost crime tourism issue that I've been hearing? Because I hear it's a lot of gangs from other South American countries flying in groups of criminals, professional criminals, almost for a couple weeks at a time, and then flying them back. What's going on there? Do we need more police officers? If so, how do we get more police officers, and what can be done about the home invasions?
Great question. So let me tell you what I would do if on day one to deal with the home invasions. First, you got to look at the players that will be involved in trying to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Gascon, as you pointed out, never prosecuted a case in his entire life. I've got 10 years of prosecuting experience. I've run a division back in the U.S. Department of Justice, but I've also been a defense attorney. Mm-hmm. I understand effectively how criminals think and how to attack government cases that are poorly designed. Mm-hmm. So you have to actually design these cases, build these cases to withstand the beyond a reasonable doubt standard and overcome a presumption of innocence. And I have 34 years of doing just that. Next, you got to work with the prosecutors in your office. These are the folks that ultimately will do the prosecution in all the courtrooms out there in the entire county. Mm-hmm. Right now, these prosecutors are incredibly demoralized. Mm-hmm. It's almost dysfunctional. 98% of them supported their boss's recall. They've lost 200 of some of the most experienced lawyers in that office that basically said, I'm done working for an unethical, illegal, or an ineffective DA, and they left. You had over 10,000 unfiled cases with 10,000 victims, 10,000 suspects, that these next cases are going to be piled on top of. You've got a situation with 20 retaliation lawsuits. So if you wanted to stand up to Gascon, he had a habit of retaliating against you.
And he's already lost a few of those from what I've got, right?
And he lost one big, $1.5 million.
Yeah.
And there's 20 more coming down the pipeline. So I have to reestablish the esprit de corps of those prosecutors, and I will. Got their endorsement. I've met with 350 of them. I told them that they are the biggest asset, the greatest asset of the DA's office. And my job as a DA is to maximize the greatest asset, which is them. Mm-hmm. So get the prosecutors ready to go, ready to prosecute, take the shackles off of them. No more Gascon political agenda deciding what they do. They go back to the facts and the law. Mm-hmm. Then the message is to law enforcement. One of the excuses that law enforcement has given by not prosecuting certain cases, they say our hands are tied, which means the DA's policy is said up front, we're not going to prosecute, so why should they actually do the investigation? Mm-hmm. I'm telling law enforcement, and I have credibility with them because my brother and I ran the LA Sheriff's Foundation. We've basically been working with hundreds of law enforcement officers for years now. And I said, guys, if I'm the DA, you're going to go back to doing your job. Mm-hmm. No longer are your hands tied. Go out, build the cases beyond a reasonable doubt, apply the law, give us the case, and we will give every case a fair shake. Then I go ahead and talk to victims. That's a tragic group in some ways. Gascon recently came out with a residential burglary new initiative. I was eager to read it. And I read through all the press release, and at the end of it says, I'm creating a hotline. Mm-hmm. A hotline. That's his answer. So I called it. It said, if a robbery or emergency is in progress, hang up and dial 911. And otherwise, leave your message at the sound of the tone, beep. That has been his efforts to deal with the growing spate of residential burglaries. The only way to really attack it and to tackle it is you've got to work with the federal and the state government and the locals. Mm-hmm. On the federal side, you got to prevent the South Americans from coming into this country who have only one purpose in mind, which is to engage in these high-level residential burglaries. Apparently, the Chileans, the Venezuelans, and the Colombians are quite good at it.
Yeah.
Then you got to work when they get caught. That's when the Gascon local law enforcement has to come into play, because they can't be caught and arrested in the morning and out by the afternoon.
Yeah.
DA's office has to do what it can to keep these folks behind bars, to send the message to the next wave of South Americans that, look, if you get caught, this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
And then now you might have heard that it's not just foreign tourism that's doing these crimes. The gangs from South LA said, wow, let's get into this action. And so here in Sherman Oaks, Encino, it's not Chileans, it's guys from South LA. Mm-hmm. And what's particularly dangerous about them is they don't care if you're in the house.
Yeah.
Those other burglars waited patiently till you left. These folks just enter your house. You know, if you end up having to get hurt and fight back, it's not going to end well. But Gascon has encouraged gangs to act as gangs by not filing the gang enhancements.
Yeah.
So if gangs understand that if you engage in gang conduct and violence occurs, that enhancement will apply, that has deterred a lot of gang conduct for 30 years. So a DA has to actually set those lines very clearly in society. Consistently, fairly, and impartially enforce them, but let the criminals know that there are real consequences on the other side of the line. To go back to what we started with, 2014, our safest year in the last 50 years, what made it the safest year is that the criminals weren't committing the crimes that year in record numbers, thus saving a whole lot of victims in the process. So if the DA is Gascon, that will never happen.
Yeah.
In fact, you will see more and more statistics of violent crime, property crime, hate crime, and human trafficking going up rather than down. The only chance is to bring in someone like myself with that 34 years experience who wants a hard middle, individualistic-based, proportional approach to criminal activity, and then seeks to achieve deterrence rather than mass incarceration.
Yeah, the basics of deterrence and common sense, bringing it back to the criminal justice system in Los Angeles. So election's coming up in just a couple weeks. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find more information about you, your campaign, and obviously get out to vote?
So please get out to vote. You know, we have, they estimate 3.7 million voters will be getting out to vote. Out of the 10.5 million people who are residents in this county, and every vote counts. And they've made it about as easy as possible for you to vote. If you're registered, you got a mail-in ballot. Open it up, fill it out, fill out the DA's race. Don't leave that race blank. You know, put in that little bubble for Nathan Hockman, then seal it, sign it, and literally put it in the mailbox. You don't even have to put postage on it. Or if you want to go to one of those ballot drop boxes that are throughout your county, go ahead, find a box, put it in there anytime before 8 p.m. on November 5th. And then on November 5th itself, if you want to take your envelope and put it in a polling place before 8 p.m., great. If you want to use those machines and fill it out, you can do that as well. By 8 p.m. November 5th, that vote has to be either in or postmarked to be a valid vote. And my website is nathanhockman.com. And it's nathanhochman.com. Please go to the website. We just loaded up a huge number of Gascon's own prosecutors who are endorsing me and have done videos on how bad Gascon has run the DA's office. We've even put in videos of victims that Gascon has completely abandoned and cause infinite tragedy for their families. Please watch those videos as well.
And also, please, of course, share them with your friends, because these are the types of things that a lot of people, a lot of the local races, everybody is so distracted with what's going on the national stage and the cheerleading, team-to-team cheerleading there. This is a race that a lot of people from both sides of the political aisle have come together around in Los Angeles, and once again trying to bring common sense back to public safety and criminal justice in Los Angeles. Nathan, I wanted to thank you so much for all your efforts in doing so and for coming on and to sharing all this information with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean, get out to vote. I mean, the final message is get out to vote. Because if we do our job, everyone watching here telling 10 friends, and then them telling 10 friends, I could literally be speaking to 100,000 people or more.
Absolutely.
Right this second. And that could be the margin of victory in this particular election. I mean, the polls show us up, which is great. But polls are polls. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
Basically, we're less than 3 weeks at this point, and I'm running around this county. Thousands of miles.
You are putting in the work. You've been blanketing the county for months now, and that's just something that, for anybody who does decide to run, I just respect so much, because people do not really realize the amount of work that goes into it, and particularly, and once again, people forget LA City versus LA County. I mean, that is about 2.5, 3 million people versus 10 million. We are living in a county that's bigger than half the countries in Europe, and it's just really massive. And this is the biggest prosecutorial office in America, right?
Oh yeah, this is the biggest. If we were a state in the United States, the LA County would be the 8th largest state. Yeah, I'll be in charge of a $460 million budget, 180,000 criminal cases every year, and 2,100 employees, 800 of which are prosecutors. I mean, you would be the Attorney General of the 8th largest state.
Yeah. No,
and as Gascon proved, see, and the other thing that people have to know is that I'm a governing body of one person. I will take no orders from the governor, the attorney general, the mayor, the police chief, the board of supervisors, the city council. Gascon proved that on his first day, first hour, first email, where he changed the direction of criminal justice in favor of criminals and away from victims, and just as quickly, I can change it back on my day one, back to that hard middle that balances these various interests, works with prosecutors, law enforcement, and victims to truly achieve deterrence again.
That's it. That is the closing statement. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody get out to vote. Nathan Hockman for DA, yes on Prop 36, and we'll be able to turn this city around. Nathan, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.